So in India, it's very hard to start your career as a user researcher because there's not much companies which understand the value of having a user researcher, and there was not many job openings at the time when I started doing user research, especially when you've just graduated from college, right? So
Yeah.
I went and started user research at a startup because startups are mostly open to having very, like much more complex roles in their environment. So I became a researcher which concentrated on AI and voice interface research, and that really kept my fire alive. I really wanted to become a user researcher after that. After working in a startup for some time, then I moved to Booking.com, and I mean, as everybody or any millennial would say, right? I'm very passionate about travel. So it was really like a lucky intersection where I used to work with my passion for traveling as well as working in the product and design space. So it was a really nice and fun role for me. And of course, I wanted to move to a company which is more focused on tech and like being one of the pioneers of UX and user experience in general. So that's how I thought I transition into a role in Spotify. So it's been a good journey so far, and learning. And I think this is a field where you learn a lot every day. So it's been good so far.
You, why design? Like, when did you decide you want to become a designer?
Okay, so I am an architect by my bachelor degree, of course. So maybe a lot of architects listening to this would understand this. When you're an architect, your primary motivation to design is understanding people's requirement. Like you cannot build a house for somebody, you're building a house for a customer or a client, right? So the house has to be sort of customized to the needs of the customer or the person you're building the house for. So I kind of really like the way that thinking went. Like you can never be in a space where you don't understand what your client needs. You have to be on your A game, and you really need to understand what your client wants from design. I think that's what motivated me to get into user experience and user research in general, because I saw a lot of potential in which you could do a lot of research to understand what people want. And of course, like a lot of successful companies have been doing so far, it's always putting user needs at the pivot of things, right? Like understanding what exactly the user wants and nailing that. So I think that sort of spark started when I was an architect, and it kind of grew into what I do every day. But definitely, I think the passion to understand what people want is what keeps me going.
Okay. Okay. So you also worked as a designer and now a researcher. So
Yeah.
how is that like? So what was different before and now? And also from the context from maybe probably from India and Netherlands as well. Like what was
Hmm.
different in India and now what is different in Netherlands or any other country?
I think also maybe this can be correlated to the timeline of work. So when I started as a designer or a graduate in human computer interaction, there was not many opportunities which kind of understood the difference between user research and UX design, product design and visual design and interaction design and interaction architecture and stuff. So there were so many things that was just mushed up into one role. Like I used to see a lot of openings that time, like saying we want to hire a UX designer who has HTML background, who has visual design skills, who has micro interaction skills. Everything was just a mix at that time when I graduated. So people were not very aware about, these professions are kind of different, and
Mhm.
there's lots of thin lines between them on, how can a single person do everything. So you really had to be like a unicorn person at that time when we started, because everybody was looking for every skill set in a person. And as a field has evolved, people have understood that okay, visual design is a different skill set, interaction design is a different skill set. People can be specialized in something. You can be a T-shaped person having a lot of skills. You can be a deep dive person having a very focused and niche skill set. People have concentrated on becoming a product designer. People have concentrated on becoming like a SaaS product designers. So it really evolved over time. But when I started, I think everybody was looking for all these skill sets in one person. And
Mhm.
I used to be in this, like this hamster wheel of doing everything, like user design and user research, and then, like client communications and everything. But from then, I think I'm really proud that the industry has kind of evolved in India, and people have understood that everything has to be done by different people. And you need a team to do user experience and not just a single person running the whole show. And this has been I think, quite a good growth in the industry.
Yeah. In fact, even last month we were talking to one of our professors, and he's currently a dean at one of the design schools, and he was telling us like every year today there are 200 new design schools opening up in India. That's
Yes.
the amount of demand and like things are happening in India.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, true, true. Yeah, I think also from a point of view that a lot of companies have actually opened their viewpoint that user experience is a very important and pivotal part of product. So, like even if you build an MVP, it should have some level of experience design in it. So
Yeah.
initially, I remember when I started off as a designer, I would be like, let's talk to users, let's do at least one usability testing before we kind of ship a product or even design an MVP. And then my manager would be like, why do you want to talk to users? Like, can't you design without talking to users? So I had always put up these fights where, no, no, let's just do one usability test, like, and especially when I was designing a project which was concentrated in both Japan and India, and I was like, we just can't expect Japanese users to have the same model of interacting with the product as an Indian user. And my manager just gave me these death stares, like, are you not good at your job? Like, why do you want to talk to users? So from that to this, like people investing so much in having user testing labs and running their own usability test in different markets to understanding that design is very local as well as global. I think it's come a very long way from in the last 4 to 5 years.
In fact, I faced a similar problem, but here my problem was I was working for an IT company and I had a client, and it's a SaaS platform. So they had
Yeah.
the users were client's client, and the
Mm-hmm.
client was not ready to give me access to their clients to talk to them
Yeah,
or
yeah,
get the research. But anyways, we so that time we used so we used to just design what we used to do, put it out and check the analytics and get data and
yeah,
insights from and then improve it because we
yeah.
had no access to the users. But
Exactly.
anyways,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
how,
yeah, yeah.
oh,
I know, I know,
coming
I know the trouble.
coming back to that question, like how are things like in India now in Amsterdam? I'm asking that question because I've visited, I've lived in India also, and I've visited Amsterdam also. So I know like how the environment changes your thinking. And so in Amsterdam or in Europe also, like even the dustbin of the bus stop is not just a bus stop. It has they have done something more with it.
Yeah.
And if you look in India, so it as a designer, it gives you a lot of it makes you think like why did they actually did this, or it's beautiful to see that. So how that environment played a role in your
Yeah, true. Yeah. I think, first of all, Amsterdam is a very multicultural city.
yeah
So even if I just jump out into the street to do a usability testing, I could find like seven users from
yeah
seven different corners of the planet. Within 5 minutes, I'm not even kidding. Like if I have to like say that I want to do a usability testing for a very, very small mock-up screen, I could just walk out of the office and I would in 5 minutes recruit five people who are entirely different in the way they think or their ethnicity or the reason why they have come to Amsterdam, etc. So it really opens up your thinking as well when you do usability tests and when you frame questions to ask users because you really want to get that
yeah
perspective of every different user out there. So it really makes you think a lot when you're in this side of the things where you want to understand users, where you want to write questions which are universal. Also, you want to give more opportunity for the users to talk about their experiences. So I think what has really changed me as a user experience researcher when I'm working in Amsterdam or like in a multicultural city is that there's so much potential to understand users in the way that you design stuff. So you're really responsible to make that effort to understand each and every user out there instead of always just thinking that okay, maybe if I design for a single persona, the product is going to work for like millions of people. So you really have that busted. That myth is going to be busted very soon. That you just can't understand the type of user through a persona template or something like that. And you really want to account for the sentiments of users. So I think that has really changed after I moved to Amsterdam.
okay. Do you as a researcher when you join in like what how do you adapt to those things, and where do you start basically?
I think the first rule that I follow as a researcher is not to create bottlenecks. Like, I don't join a team and say that, okay, oh, okay, let's stop, let's just do some research. I really want to be a team player, even though at sometimes that means that you might have to compromise some things. But
Mhm.
initially, when you walk into a team and start working, and if you start creating bottlenecks, saying, oh, slow down, let's talk to users now, it really creates that you don't get that dynamic with your team. Like they might feel like, okay, you are just here to create bottlenecks because you want to be the voice of users. But you've also kind of understand that the business is going forward. There are millions of things that are there in the product side. There's lots of other issues like if I don't do this now, something else is going to get affected and stuff like that. So I think I just try really hard not to be that bottleneck. So that means I have like a really early win with my team. So they know that, okay, she's not here to create problems saying that, oh, let's talk to users all the time. Being a team player is very, very important when you start working in any organization because you really don't know the context of things. It takes time to kind of understand the story behind the product, the scenarios, the user stories. So just being in a team and studying all these documents, the things that they have already done, understanding their mistakes, understanding their wins, what is working with the product is very important. So don't expect to like jump into a organization and next day start doing a usability test. You really need to like take steps back and learn the team, learn the process, learn everything about their users, the product. So I feel like I always take a lot of time to kind of understand this. And I always present this back to the team. So I take 1 month to study the product and the process, and I always give a presentation back to the team saying that, okay, this is what I've learned from you guys in the first month. I kind of summarize all the user stories I know so that they can tell me, okay, this is not right, this is wrong, this is not what we want, this is what we got, etc., etc. So you really have to get that context in place.
Correct.
Sometimes I feel like whenever I have some teammates who jump in saying, oh, let's do a usability test tomorrow, this could be like a little harming to the team because they've already have their sprints planned and everything is there. So you really need to first understand how to be a team player if you really need to get that sync with the team.
Yeah. So, like talking about the sprints, like because research can take 2 days or even 20 days. So, how do you plan your projects? Like, how do you plan your sprints, or how do you like collaborate with other teams? Because if research goes wrong, then the other things might also go wrong, right? It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think the process is to be very open about this. So you should understand that, okay, there is a lot of space to plan your research. Like you can plan generative projects well ahead of time. You can kind of collaborate with all the sprint planning your team has, but you should always leave some time for ad hoc projects as well. So a team is going to say that, oh, suddenly we found that this is a bug and we might need to use a test this or something like that. So you have to have the space where you need to know that there's going to be some ad hoc request that's going to come your way every quarter or every half, how your planning is going. So being open to that and making sure that you're a very approachable researcher and you're very open to having these ad hoc requests as well makes it very easy for your team to know that they don't have to plan everything with you in advance. That said, you should also be a researcher who's able to plan some of these very larger or generative projects very well ahead of time so that your team is aware that, okay, there's this project coming, we will get insights from this project and we have to use them in our product cycle. So it's a balance between having like a really good system in which your team is really aware from day zero onwards what your project is, what is the process, what is the kind of insights that you are looking for, and how can they apply it in their product or process planning. Whereas you should also be like some person they can come to when they say that, oh, we really want to know if this is possible, like ideate with you or have some workshops with you or have some user testing. So having both that equation with your team is very important when you are working as a user researcher.
Okay. So how do you decide? Like, so there are a lot of methodologies, right? Methods are there in research. So
Hmm.
what method to choose? Like, how narrow or how broad to go? Like,
Right.
yeah, it depends on context, but like, how do you work as a UX designer?
Yeah, when I was working in booking, one of the researchers told me an answer to this question. I still feel that's one of the best answers I've heard for this question. Is that user research is a mix of art and science. So there's also an art involved in this, like in the method selection, and in like there's also a science involved in this because the science is of course the methods that like that interviews can be done, diary studies can be done, maybe surveys or like contextual studies, maybe in-lab studies, etc. But there are lots of different methods that are there in your hands. But it's also an art to understand that basic combination of these methods that work together to bring the best insights, right? So, like generally, It is really up to the researcher to choose what methods to sort of combine and get that insights. And that is the art part, like combining these methods or using a single method to get that insight. But like there's no standard rule, I think, for this. Like it's really like from the researcher's experience or the context that you have. But I think basically the answer to this question is to understand that you should be really flexible with the methods that you want to combine and the kind of insights that you want. I think that is the kind of good mix to get a successful project.
But don't you think like the art can actually be affected with other variables when you calculate the time required to do that method or the money
Mm.
companies open to doing that thing or not, and that will influence a lot like what combinations of research methods we use. Uh,
I think yes, and I think there's a yes and no part to this. So in organizations where the UX maturity is quite high, like for example, if you have like a very good research team and a really good structure of research, I don't think there's this dilemma of constraints coming in because everybody's open to the idea that research takes so much time or research takes so much effort, and it's not like a daily process where suddenly you will get insights. But of course, I've heard this a lot where in organizations where the UX maturity of or the user research maturity is quite low, where you have like a single researcher running the whole show and people are pressured into like doing fast studies, etc. So I think that definitely is a constraint, like the UX maturity of the organization, because that means the researcher also has to fight for the method and the recruitment and stuff. So I think I really want, like the growth has come so far, and I really want that growth to continue to this, where people understand the timeline of research, the investment that we need, the kind of participations that we require from stakeholders on this. And I think we'll get there because we are growing in a good pace. But definitely, like the maturity of the organization kind of influences this part of the equation.
so talking about these big companies, like can you take us through a day of a researcher, like how it starts and what all things you do in an entire day? A
Mm.
bigger organization, not like startups, but I think the
Yeah,
startups
yeah, yeah.
are very hectic, but
I can definitely take you through my day at Spotify. So basically, I meet my team in the morning and I always update them about the research that's happening. I usually have like a planning meeting with my product manager or my engineering manager or maybe a data scientist to understand
okay.
what are they looking at, what are the needs, etc. I might have some interviews scheduled for the day. Then I usually spend my afternoons looking at data. So I look at maybe data from any of these projects where I always have some focus time to do analysis and everything. And maybe towards the end of the day, if I have some very interesting finds from data or from the interviews, I publish them on my Slack channel with my team to keep up the interest. So basically, the day is in combination with understanding and talking to different members of the team. And I also have some focus time to work on the insights and the analysis part as well. So I think it's mix of both generally, my day at Spotify.
Okay. Wow. And so after you design your research goals, how like what is the way you define your KPIs? Like what could be the success metric for okay, you did this, but if we achieve this, then it was successful. Like
Hmm.
any example if you can give us that could better explain that.
Yep. Okay. So I think one of the good examples is a project that I did at Booking, which was to make sure that so you know that booking.com app has a map inside the app which lets you see the hotels near the area that you're searching. So we wanted to make sure that we have what do you say, like good engagement with these maps because we were seeing that users are not very happy with the maps. They were finding it very difficult to understand the location because the primary problem is, of course, that some of these users are traveling to this destination for the first time, right? Like if you go to Paris for the first time, you will not be able to figure out where to book your accommodation because you have no
Yeah.
idea about where you want to stay or what is the city like.
Right.
But maps can be quite beneficial because we've already seen that Google Maps is such a huge success. People are able to do a lot of things with maps in unknown cities. So we really had this generative study to understand these users, like how do they use maps? What are the kind of problems that they're facing?
Okay.
And then we came up with a set of jobs that these users would do And primarily, we made this survey to understand if these jobs are actually applicable to a lot of users. So it started with a qualitative study where we understood what are the jobs that users want to do. Then we ran like a quant survey to understand if these jobs are actually valid to a lot of customers across a lot of markets and stuff. And then we started when we went into a design solution where we designed for these jobs. And then we also could measure the success of the jobs through metrics, right? So we had a through and through process. So we started with a qualitative, we validated with a quant, then we designed with respect to the jobs. And then finally, when we had to validate the findings, we had like metrics which were also designed to the job. So everything was tied to the foundational research. And this was very essential for the team as well to measure their success because this process is very thorough and they could see that these results could actually bring in more customers. So I think the success metrics for generative research generally ties back to the kind of whole process that you've started. And it's quite easy when the process is very end to end. Whereas like if you're only doing something like a usability test or something like that, you should always use very existing metrics like system usability scale or like any of the standard metrics which you can measure the success with as well. So sometimes you can design, you have that, what do you say, that validity to design your own metric because the process was very thorough or you had like an end-to-end research process for this. Whereas with some cases, like if you are launching a new feature or if there's something to do with like a UI change, you should always think about the standard metric practices out there, which is easier to measure as well. So yeah, I think definitely based on the project, you have different context to set success metrics. And it's very essential that user researchers proactively set success metrics or define metrics for each project. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. Like if whatever metrics is out there, you should definitely adapt and use that in your project. Like I've seen so many researchers sometimes trying to do innovative things, whereas there's already a standard way of doing it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be shameful and saying that, oh, I did not invent something, so I should, I should feel bad about it. No, if there's a standard practice, you should definitely take that and let the team measure that. So sometimes I have had the opportunity to like invent or look at different metrics, but I always also am an advocate of using the standard metrics practices out there.
So when you say about qualitative research, like is it like interviews, like what type of?
Yeah.
Okay, and cons, is it like surveys or the website metrics you're talking?
Uh, if you're doing a lot of generative research, basically when you have to validate your quant findings, you can definitely do like a survey, which is a collection of the attitudinal behavior towards the qualitative findings. But sometimes you are also capable of doing the other way, right? You can look at, like, for example, if you're looking at Netflix home screen and you want to understand what is going wrong, you can start with the analytics of the home screen and then understand what is the problem and then collect the why part through the qualitative studies. So you can validate both ways. You can start with qualitative and validate through quant. Sometimes you start with quant and validate through qual. Sometimes you can do the other path where you look at quant and qual and see which is the problem that's more weightage to the team. So yeah, mixed method is quite popular these days to kind of understand exactly the what is the user issue, and I think it's really valid and a fascinating journey because most of these products are uh, accessible to millions of users, and it's quite hard to find what is the right problem very fast.
So how? So because you spoke about analytics, like
Yeah.
is the UX researcher's job to understand analytics, create those, use Tableau softwares, create fetch data, create because we are doing it at our school right now. So
Mm.
I just wanted to ask, like, is this a day-to-day task which you guys do?
Essentially, I think it depends on your passion. So, if you really feel like you have the time to kind of explore data sets and create dashboards, very good. You can go ahead and do it. There's nothing shameful by saying that, oh, I don't know how to do data analytics and I need somebody in the team to help me. Somebody will definitely come and help you. So, like in my team, I'm one user researcher supporting many data scientists and data analytics people. So, I might not have the bandwidth to do it, and I feel like the one thing that we're taught in school is like you have to be good at everything.
Yeah.
It's not essential because when you are in a team, you'll definitely have people who can help you with tasks and because everybody's working towards something successful, right? We're not working towards getting I'm not working towards getting, okay, I have 5 dashboards running as a user researcher, but I need to have that one dashboard which is working perfectly so that we can understand our users. So it's not about individual goals that you achieve in a product team, right? You're working towards something that the product wants.
Yeah.
So you'll definitely have all the help that you need if you want it. Sometimes I feel like when I'm experimenting and I really want to understand some data sets, I do take my time to kind of look at that because it might not be a very solution oriented approach. I'm just trying to understand something. So you always have that sort of area where you can explore, and you should also have the skill set to kind of do some stuff. But you don't have to be an what do you say, like a professional at it as well. So you can get some help from people who have been doing this for years. So I would never, I mean, I would definitely encourage people who have been trying to use and understand data analytics because if you're passionate about it, you should definitely do it. But is it like a mandate at job? Definitely not, because you always have some help from data analysts or data scientists to help you with stuff. So yeah.
So I don't know if it's an NDA, but what softwares do you guys use? Like, do you use
Ah,
Google Analytics or something?
Yeah, we do have like an in-house analytics tool to understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, so you also spoke about surveys, and I have a question like, how do you structure your surveys and how do you structure those questions? So we have been having a hard time to, because we didn't want to ask a direct question. We wanted to
Hmm.
give them a situation or probably, and then take, and how many questions are a good number of questions for one particular survey? And what is
Hmm.
your experience? Because people might just click, and we may get like very fake data or which is useless for us. So how do you design a survey? Yeah.
Yeah. So initially when I started in the field, I was not even comfortable doing surveys because it was not my forte at all because I was a qualitative researcher. But somehow I reached this point where, I had to validate my findings and I had to run surveys. And I also kind of realized that surveys is one point where you can get a lot of data from a lot of diverse group of audiences or customers. I think I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in this, but I'm going to just like share my experience that I have learned in surveys. So the context of surveys is very important. So for example, if you are developing a survey which is in product, like you want to have some quick feedback, you should really keep in mind that users are trying to achieve something in the app or in the website. Getting in their way and creating a hassle is not a good task to do at all. So you should really know when are you running the survey. So for example, if there's a trigger to the survey, like if the user has been in your website and been struggling for like let's say 20 seconds, you might get this value from a data scientist, like what is the average time the user spends on a web page. And then you pop up a survey and say that, we think you're struggling, can you tell us why, etc. So you really need to understand when to and how to pop a survey to a user when the user is using the product because ultimately it should never hinder, like as a user researcher, of course, feedback is valuable to you, but it should never stop the user from using the product or the primary task that the user has been trying to achieve. So in product surveys are generally like a niche forte that you need to develop and it comes through a lot of experience. Like how many questions can you ask the user? What is the point of entry? What is the kind of like skills? Like, is it like a skill that would work? How do you create engagement in the survey? Like, like maybe if it's like a thumbs up, thumbs down, is that enough to validate something? For example, if it's like a home screen change, I think something like a thumbs up, thumbs down is enough for you to understand if this is going well. So the context of in product or like surveys within the product is very important. And the primary rule is not to hinder users. Even though feedback is valuable to you, you should never put it above the user's needs. Of course, the other surveys, then you have paid surveys for users, right? So you want to understand or validate some findings through larger surveys. You usually have some sort of appreciation, like a cost appreciation, where the users get paid to take these surveys.
Mhm.
In these surveys, you should definitely look at basic things like straight liners are people who would just click middle options, like they would say neutral for everything because they want to get paid
Yeah.
for these surveys or they want to complete these surveys. But also make sure that you design questions maybe in a way that you can catch these people very fast. Like, within the third or fourth question, you know that these people are not very focused on the survey, so you need to make them sure that they exit the survey. When you even take these surveys which are very focused on user needs, you need to find the right participants. You need to really design a good recruitment survey. So the recruitment survey is a very mandatory thing that you need to do. The basic survey should also have questions which would catch the outliers and the straight liners. So I think it's definitely an art, something that I think I hope to get better as a user researcher. But also like when you are doing surveys which are longer, you really need to know that you need to have that you reduce the cognitive load of users by having a right number of qualitative answers and Likert scales and questions which are very complex should be in some section where you can divide the load of the user and the user and increase the completion rates. So I think there's a lot of factors based on how you do surveys, and I think as a researcher you get better at it as you progress in your career and the number of surveys. Because I regret the first survey I did. I think like it was horrible. I don't even know how I got insights from those surveys. But you really get good at it, I think, as you progress. And there are lots of people who write about surveys. So one of the best things I do is I read a lot about surveys. And as a user researcher, I take every survey that comes to me, like even if it's a Google survey that is on product, if it's a Netflix survey, any of these e-commerce surveys that come to me, I always take them just to see what are the questions that people are asking. So if LinkedIn is sending me a survey regarding, oh, you've been a user for good user for 3 months, could you give us some feedback? I always take it just to understand what are the questions that people ask. And the other thing is, of course, when you run surveys, it should be peer reviewed. You should review it with people and make sure that the wordings are making sense to people. It's not conveying the wrong meaning. So always have surveys which are peer reviewed. Do pilot surveys. If you're launching for a huge number of people, make sure that you launch to 20 people and see how the responses are coming. Are people finding it hard? Do we have enough completion rates? So doing pilots of survey process is quite essential. So I think these are the kind of tips that I generally do when I'm running surveys.
Okay, this was I never thought about that. Like I think I should start taking surveys of. I was like going through Google identifying how to write a survey, but yeah, this is the right way
Yeah,
now.
you should definitely take surveys that come your way through product because it's a no hassle learning experience, I guess.
Yeah. So like you said, you like traveling. You also worked in Booking.com. So as a traveler, and then worked on like the backstage. Like, what is that one story you have where you thought, okay, I was a traveler here, but these people were actually making the decisions for me, or whatever. Like as a UX user, we a lot of time we manipulate, we make users do take decisions, or any other story you have where you
Mm.
find something for users, and when you went in the backstage you realize, oh, this was how it was created.
Yeah. So I think like when I was working in the Booking.com app team specifically, and when I joined Booking, the app was growing. So Booking was primarily a website-oriented organization, and their business was through websites. And when I had joined Booking, because of the millennial and Gen Z conversion into app-focused e-commerce, Booking.com app was getting a lot of downloads and people were booking through apps. And this means that we had a lot more valuable data with us because people would generally give us their location and we knew where they were traveling to. So primarily a lot more things that we could not understand through website users was visible through our app users because app users generally tend to be more personalized in the way they handle stuff, right? So I think this was a very, what do you say, a very good time to learn a lot from a company which was primarily website driven and moving into an app focused culture. We had 100 million downloads when I was there, and celebrating. So in a company which was flourishing and had so many things going on a website, and to see them growing in the app stage and having 100 million downloads. We had T-shirts for 100 million downloads. We had merchandise for that because the team felt it was a big achievement. So even in organizations which are really doing very well for themselves, there are things that emerge for them And being in that part of the story is also quite fun because you see that, they have to reinvent their wheel, look at things from different perspectives, look at people who are very different as user base because the app users are basically Gen Z or millennial users versus their website users are completely different. So understanding a new user base, catering their business towards that is also very challenging for any organization. So looking at all these, you feel like, oh, they've been in the business, they know their business, but they still struggle with a lot of new user needs primarily for these users. So it is very interesting to see that change in a shift of thinking in organizations when they move from website to app.
Okay. Very cool. So coming to, so you worked with users, travelers, and everything. Now you're working on engineering systems. So how that is
Yes,
different? Like you're empathizing with a different kind of thing. But at the end, it is obviously user who is going to benefit.
yes, yes.
But so we were so we had this one thing where we were looking into biasness in artificial intelligence and engineering systems or the Alexas and how they are little biased. So we were thinking of how a user researcher could actually or a designer who is making or conceptualizing it, they should be mindful of all these things. So I
Yeah.
think that is my understanding, like what you are doing at Spotify.
Hmm.
So what do you do exactly, like with engineering
Yeah.
systems?
So as okay, so let's take very big tech organizations like maybe Spotify or something like Instagram or something. So many developers work on the system for a single feature, right? Like there are n number of developers working on a single feature. So like a single feature has to move in Android, a single feature has to move in iOS, it has to move in their web app, and it is catering to so many people out there. So these developers, when they do a lot of stuff or a lot of developer-oriented activities and things, it's very important for them to have like a very seamless process. So the developer working environment within tech organizations is very important. So these are the engineering systems that help them build these features, right? So this is basically the kind of work that is very system driven. Because when you launch a feature, there is a lot of things that go into the developer's activity, and that's how they are able to launch these features. And this also has a lot of issues, like, sometimes people could go wrong in the way they do stuff, and they face a lot of issues within the systems and understanding the workflow, like, when you start a feature, what happens, what are the communications that go around it, uh, everything. So it's a very complex process to launch something into a product which is used by millions and millions of people. And it requires a lot of research to make sure that this process is very seamless for the developers. They have the right support to do this. They have the right communication systems to do this. And this kind of essentially runs the business for the organization as well, right? Having a good system for developers to perform. So user researchers are quite important in this to understand the problems of these systems and the workflows. So I think in simple words, if you look at it, it's understanding service design part of a application and helping them get better at it. So it's a very complex and what do you say? Like it's a very complex field because people don't invest so much into this, but it should be something that should be invested really well because understanding developer related issues and developer related tasks and having a good system in place where people can develop features is quite important for an organization of any scale, right? So it's also, I think, something that's emerging in terms of how to build products.
Okay. So is it like internal? It's for the developer
Yes,
and the, okay, how they
yes,
work.
it's
Okay.
yeah.
I thought it's on the interface, like how the algorithm, how the engineering systems work.
So it's connected to the
Connect to
engineering
that.
system
Okay.
as well because the developer systems is a layer deeper to the engineering systems that the user has, right? So it's connected to it's a web of events, I would say. So if you have the developer activities are quite seamless, then you have the engineering side activities as well. So I think it's complex in terms of the system knowledge that people have. So yeah,
So it's like, so how, because as a user, I can empathize with an user, but now I have to
yeah.
empathize with the developer and also the technology, which is much more complex, I think. So I don't,
Yeah.
So how
I
do
think a
you?
simple way that I would make you maybe give an explanation is this is definitely a very data driven process. So we're kind of understanding how developers function, how technology functions through data and metrics. So essentially you're building making sure that there is a good metric to measure all this,
Okay. Okay.
and you're kind of understanding from the event or triggers that are happening with developers. So this is not very active on the qualitative side, but you're actually monitoring what's happening internally and making sure that everything is going smoothly. And then you also kind of understand where things are falling apart through data,
Mhm.
looking at the data patterns that are emerging from developers and engineering systems and how do they make sense. So it's mostly understanding the environment through data patterns, I would say.
Okay. So it's like system design, service design, UX
Yeah,
design. It's like everything, you know. In fact,
yes, it's like a gray area of all this.
yeah, yeah. In fact, I had so last week we had this one guy coming in our university who was his name is Kpis, and he's a designer at NASA. And I had this again a question like, who are the users at Mars and Moon for you? Like, what are you making it for? And
Yeah,
then I mean, he had the same answer. Like he designed system for the operators. He don't he do,
yeah,
so he doesn't call them users because he said okay, users are only in software and drug users.
yes,
So he's like, I designed for operators who operate the rovers on Mars. So how
mm,
everything works. But the most important factor which he pointed out was the information flow between teams, because there are bigger teams which are working on missions for 5 years. There are
mm,
teams on daily basis who look into like everyday climate conditions in
right,
Mars and blah, blah, which affects the 5 year mission as well. So there are teams
yeah,
under
yes,
teams, and they have built a system to communicate that. So I want to ask you the same question, like how information and flow and the transaction flow, like in between these teams,
yes, yes.
how do you deal with that in your system?
Yes, I think the challenge that we face and also the challenge that we work towards is having a common language that people can understand about all this. Because, like when I say something like, oh, the Spotify monthly active users are coming down, everybody understands that.
Right.
Like, oh, yeah, we don't have enough monthly active users, let's do something about it. Or if I say that, okay, if I talk about booking, they said, okay, we don't have so many number of daily bookings coming in, then they know that there's something wrong and they should act upon this, right? With internal work and the work that we do, it's important for us to have that common language and make it very simplified that people understand and have a buy-in towards these issues. So we have to make sure that these complex issues are communicated in a very vital and simplified way that it makes sense to anybody who's also agnostic to the system understand these things, right? We have to make. So I think that is one of the best challenges that I have actually faced in my role. Make sure to understand that when you have some complex problems, of
Mhm.
course you have to solve for it, which is the primary factor that why you work there, but also communicating these primary problems to people who are not very familiar with the domain or are not very like, but they need to know this because they also are part of the decision making. Like for example, leadership is also part of the decision making for the internal research, right? So we also need to understand, okay, this is the problem, this is the metric, this is what we're monitoring. So I think the communication of these issues, because people are not very familiar with this, so increasing the familiarity factor, and these are the additional problems that also we face apart from solving something which is complex. So yeah, I think that's like you said, the information communication and information being very simplistic for that people can understand what we're working towards is also, I think, a good challenge in this role.
And so, where are the conflicts happening? So, because again, I'll take the example of Guy Vizurek, NASA guy, and he's like, I'm designing system for a scientist who comes to me and tells me, "Oh, I built this system. You give me anything, I'll use it because I know everything." Right?
Mhm.
I think it's the same case for you because you are dealing with developers. You're creating a system for like an interface for developers. Probably
Yeah.
they know everything about the system, but still it needs a user experience.
Yes.
So
Okay.
like how,
One of the simple examples that I can give is something like this is a hypothetical problem. So this is not something that I face, but maybe a good example to explain the scenario. Okay, let's say that our developers are able to do like a test of their feature in 6 hours.
uh,
But during these 6 hours, they will have to wait for a lot of process. They have to do a lot of steps to maintain the 6 hours of activity. And people are working across different time zones. So in the 6 hours, when somebody's running a test, this could hinder somebody's work in New York if you are running a test in, let's say, Amsterdam.
yeah,
And the developer is not going to be aware about it because he's only looking at his test and his running for 6 hours. Whereas somebody who wakes up in New York is going to have another issue because that person is not aware that this developer is going to go through or is running a test. But the system has to have like an eagle's eye view where somebody's monitoring everything and making sure that this developer and this developer does not have an issue, right?
yeah,
So that's the kind of like the space where companies can function effectively, that both the developers have a hassle-free work day, because we have thought about this situation where somebody who's running a test in Amsterdam is going to affect somebody who's going to wake up in New York, and that's like at that same day. So this kind of changes the way the day will be for both the developers. And there's a lot of research to understand how we can solve for this, how we can make sure that both of them have like a seamless day, both of them don't run into issues, and at the end of the day, of course, launch and run that test, right? That's the primary factor. So this kind of requires a lot of research and understanding of this complex process. So we want to make sure that okay, this has to be taken care of so that employees can really focus their attention on what they want to do every day.
right.
I don't know if this makes sense, but yes.
It makes a lot of sense. But where do we have the conflict? Like, what is that part of your as a UX research role where you find the most difficult, or you maybe so? For example, when I was working in my company, a lot of time I had to convince my the directors probably to do a particular thing. So convincing was
Hmm.
happening a lot. Like I was focusing less on design and I was focusing more on convincing them. Okay, okay, let's do this. Guy. So what is that
Hmm.
in research? Bigger companies basically, because they are open to research, like
Yeah,
you said. But what are those areas where you find okay, they are still not open to, or you maybe developer versus designer, the fights always happen. So whatever. What are
true,
those
true.
points?
I think in this role, what I understand is that this is something that like a growing, a growing space inside the organizations because, like for example, when Spotify started, they might not have expected that they will have 8,000 developers working uh, on a single day, right? Or when Meta started, they never knew that this is going to be such a huge environment within the company, which is going to have a lot of problems every day, and they would need a lot of things to be done so that developers can have a peace of mind when they start working.
Correct.
So when you have like an emerging field, like everything that you do is going to be exciting. So everything that you publish is going to have like a lot of attention from leadership and product managers and engineering managers and stuff. So to have that carefully, like you don't have like an aspiring you don't know if this is okay, like okay, this is a standard rule or standard way of doing stuff, because you're learning as you go, and you're improvising every day to make sure that your message about this is heard. So like in user research, at least like now that it's very old, and in most companies it's very mature, that okay, this is easy to do because you have to just do this according to the way it's already been invented.
Correct.
Whereas in this space, I think we are still trying to figure out, okay, if this works, this does not works, what does not work. Having buy-ins are quite hard. So I think emerging fields, definitely, I think the same issue as if you are starting like a fresh user research team in a company which did not have user research before. I think it's similar pragmatic problems where you really have to make sure that everything is very well defined and very well structured, that people really know that, okay, this is going to work, this is not going to work, we're moving towards this goal and stuff. So I think that emerging field or the emerging team issues is definitely something that at least my team has, because we are something that's coming out new.
Yeah, it's very interesting that design is a very old field, but still it's still in a very nascent stage. We still need a lot
Yes,
of
yeah, yes, exactly. And I think like Like, for example, when you join as a designer at Spotify, you will still feel like, oh, this is such a good organization here because it's been there for a long time and they're a very design-driven organization. They really understand user needs to the core. But also in Spotify, you'll understand that, okay, there are some things that they're still learning about because there's something emerging in new product development or something like that. So every day, even though some of the fields are really strong and mature, in every company, you'll have something that's emerging and growing within the organization, right? When you're
Yeah.
working in those teams, your experience will be completely different from working in one of the mature teams of the same organization. So if you talk to some user researcher at Spotify working in personalization, they are going to give you an entirely different set of problems because personalization is one of the oldest and one of the most what do you say most sought after team in Spotify, and they nail it. They're so good at personalization, right? So the user researchers, they would give you another set of problems than what I have right now in the organization, which is quite different from what they are facing, even though we are part of something that contributes the same aim, right? Making music accessible to all. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you one fun question. Like, can you see our playlist which we create on Spotify?
No,
Okay.
I can't.
Okay, then
I wish, no, but I can't.
okay.
I used to also get this question when I was working in booking. Like my cousins used to ask me, like, can you see who we're booking with or who are we booking for? And I was like, no, I can't. And I wish I could, and I could make a lot of money blackmailing people, but I unfortunately just I don't have access to that data.
Okay, so on that point, like, do you like as a user behavior, like, any analytics, do you know, like, okay, on Spotify, people listen to a lot of sad songs or maybe whatever. Any
Hmm.
what insight you can give us to daily design story?
I think one of the good insights or one of the fun conversations that I've heard at Spotify is that like a lot of like Spotify is India is one of the huge one of the largest user bases of Spotify. So people here are like at least the Western music is not aware about the kind of genre that we have in India.
Right.
But I was very shocked when I joined Spotify that like most of the Spotifyers who work in the music division, or I think most of them are kind of aware about a lot of music genres within India.
Okay.
I was shocked when they say something like, a lot of people listen to Harihar, and I was like, you know that? Because they handle data so much with Indian
Yeah.
music that they really know our music well. So it's really fun to see all these people saying that, oh, A.R. Rahman is trending today. They really know our artists quite well, because India is one of the largest user bases. So it's fun to see them appreciating the different types of Indian music and Indian artists and, the trending charts. And I think Kesaria is also trending right now within Spotify. So they're aware about all this, and these fun conversations would come when you're like drinking coffee with one of them or something, like they're like, oh, Kesaria is trending on Spotify. So it's really nice to see them being so open and they love the Indian user base, and they really take a lot of effort to understand Indian music type. And I really appreciate that about this organization. They're really open to like, so especially like some of the teams would know what is trending in Brazil, and some of the teams would know what is trending somewhere else, and they really know the music in and out, which is very nice. They're really, really like a company which is very respectful to all genres of music, which is very nice. I think it's one good thing that I really like about Spotify.
Wow. Okay. So on this closing note, like, what message would you like to give to any UX researcher or designer who's starting into this field of UX research and to be successful? Yeah.
I
And
think
any
what
portfolio advice. I think I also add the portfolio advice. How a portfolio should.
hmm, yeah, maybe I can start with, of course, the portfolio question. So when you think about, people who are starting out as designers and who want to go into UX research, or people who are graduating as user research and going into the field as user researchers, you can't rely. Like, don't put like seven methods, and like you've done everything in anything. Don't drag all these things into your portfolio because it's very easy for somebody who's taking your interview to understand if you really actually know this or not know this. But I think when we hire university graduates or people who are starting out in user research, we are trying to understand people who are really passionate about this and who have really worked towards being a user researcher. So in some of these interviews, I feel like people come and tell me that, oh, they've done like 7 qualitative studies and they've done this and they've done that. And then you give them a task, they really don't crack it because they really don't have the experience. But if you come to an interview and tell me something like, I really want to do a diary study, but I've never had the chance to do it, it's actually quite legit because not every researcher out there gets a chance to do a diary study right now because it's really hard in all organizations to convince people to do a diary study. So I really like people who come and tell you that I only had the chance to do qualitative interviews because that's what my stakeholders are open to. I've never had the chance to do like diary studies, or I've never had a chance to do like an in-person study because my organization has not supported it. And I would like to go to an organization which would support diary studies or in-person studies in the future because that's what where I want to grow and I want to learn. Instead of like coming to an interview and saying things like that. So when you start building a portfolio, make sure that you put in work which is quite holistic in terms of things that you've done and things that is quite presentable, and also be very open about what you want to do as a researcher, how you want to grow, what are the methods that you want to learn, and why are you choosing this organization? Because like, is it because this organization is doing a lot of experiments? Is it because they're doing a lot of new product development and you want to grow in that field? So I think being more transparent about this, because we really know that not all organizations out there would support all methods or like all the kind of studies that you really want to do as a researcher. So I think being transparent in your portfolio is quite important. Second thing, I think what a lot of people do wrong, at least when I see it, is that they send me portfolio with like 5 projects, and they kind of expect me to choose a project that they want me to like read. So the problem with this is that I'm going to choose anything randomly, right? And you're going to lose that chance where to showcase your best effort to me. So if you really want to impress somebody on the interview panel or somebody who's just opening a portfolio, make sure that you say that, oh, this is the project that would really showcase my skill set, and make that person open that project. So if you send me like a template where I have like 6 projects in thumbnails, I am going to choose something randomly, not the first one for sure. Don't assume that users will click the first thumbnail and look at that project. I am going to click something that interests me, and that is not going to be your best work. And I would be like, oh, this person has just done like some usability test. Why should I hire this person? Whereas if you want that person to be impressed by that project, make sure that you highlight and say that, okay, this is one of the things that I can maybe show my end-to-end research skills or design skills or anything, and make sure that the person is opening that particular project. And you can always tell them that, okay, I have other 5 projects. If you have the time, please go through them just to see my interest in different fields or my exposure to different fields. So I really hate these portfolios which come to me with 6 thumbnails and I have to choose one. I think that's something that everybody is doing wrong these days.